Okay, this is the Algebra 2 Unit 4 preview. I am creating a video since I will not be at school to do it. So please you view this at your own time or during class as you work through the preview. Objective 1 is quadratic attributes. You are finding the y-intercept, x-intercepts, vertex, and axis of symmetry. The y-intercept, you may or may not be able to see it, so if you can't, then you need to calculate it, and I'm going to do that down here with my f of x equals 2x squared plus 12x plus 10. In order to find the y-intercept, that is when my x is 0. So if I plug in 0 for all of my x's, 2 times 0 squared is going to be 0. That's going to cancel out. 12 times 0 is 0. That's going to be 0. And that leaves my f of x is equal to 10. So that means my y-intercept is at 0, 10. You might be able to see that here. Okay, my x-intercepts, that's where they cross the x-axis. And those are going to be at negative 5, 0 and negative 1, 0. And we can pull that off of the graph. The vertex is where it stops going down and starts going up. That's going to be at this point here, which is negative 3, negative 8. And then we have our axis of symmetry. That is, goes directly through our vertex, and that is a vertical line. And a vertical line has an equation of x equals, and it's h, so it's whatever our h coordinate is for our axis of symmetry. And that's our information for number 1. Number 2, our y-intercept. I definitely cannot see it on our graph, so I'm going to have to calculate it by plugging in 0 for x. So f of x is equal to negative 0 minus 5 squared plus 4. That's going to give me negative 5 squared plus 4. That's going to give me negative 25, because this negative 5 squared would be positive, and then this one would be the negative, plus 4. And my f of x is going to be negative 21. So I can't see it on the graph, but it's going to cross the y-axis at 0, negative 21. My x-intercepts are here at 3 and 7. So 3, 0 and 7, 0. My vertex, this is where it's going to stop going up and start going down. That's going to be at this point here at 5, 4. And my axis of symmetry goes right through that vertex point. It is a vertical line, so it starts with x equals 5. Our next objective was to change the standard form of a quadratic equation to the vertex form. And the way that we do that is to use the completing the square method. My y is going to come all the way down. And what we did here was x squared minus 4x. We put those parts in parentheses. We left a little space here, and then plus 5. Then we want to complete the square. First thing I need to check is to make sure a is equal to 1, and it is. And then I can put my square here to complete my square. Now, that's on the inside. Since I'm on the same side of the equation, I have to subtract that square. So to get my square, I need to take b over 2 squared, and this will be the only problem I demonstrate that on, because it should be mental math by now. And that was going to give me negative 4 over 2 squared, which gives me negative 2 squared, which equals 4. So 4 will go in my squares. And now I need to complete the square, so it's going to be x minus 2 squared. And this minus 2 is coming from here. It's the half b part. And then I'm going to simplify plus 5 minus 4, which gives me plus 1. So my equation is y equals x minus 2 squared plus 1. Okay, problem number 2. My y's are going to come down. I put parentheses around my x squared minus 16x. And I put my square. And I have plus 70 minus my square. I want to make sure that a is equal to 1, and it is. So then I'm going to take this number, half it, which gives me negative 8, and square it, which gives me 64. So 64 goes in my squares. Then I complete the square. It's going to be x, and the half was 8, so it's going to be x minus 8 squared, and 70 minus 64 is 6. And I bring my y equals down. And this is my vertex form of the equation. Okay, for number 5, we're going to start out the same. I'm going to put negative 3x squared and 48x in the parentheses, minus 187 on the outside. This time, I do not have a equal to 1, it's negative 3. So I'm going to factor that out. So negative 3 comes on the outside, divide it out, and I get x squared minus 16x on the inside. Then I can put my square, minus 187, minus, now, since I have a number on the outside, I need to account for that. So it's going to be negative 3, and then my box, my square. Then I proceed as normal. My negative 3 stays out here. I'm going to take half of my negative 16, which is 8, and 8 squared is 64. And that 64 will go in my box here as well. Then I'm going to complete my square. It's going to be x minus 8 squared. Then I'm going to simplify the negative 187 minus negative 364. That's going to become a double negative. And 3 times 64 is 192. And 192 minus 187 gives me 5. So bring down my y's. Y equals, y equals, y equals. And this is my equation. Okay, question number 6. I'm going to put parentheses around 4x squared minus 56x. And then my 200 goes on the outside. A is not equal to 1, so I need to factor out a 4. So 4 comes on the outside, and I'm left with x squared minus 14x. And here I can put my square, plus 200 minus, and then I need that factor, 4, and then my other square. Okay, if I take half of 14 and square it, I get 49. So 49 goes into my squares. And I get 4 times x minus 7 squared, because that was the half piece. And then I have to simplify plus 200 minus 4 times 49. And that gives me 196 when I multiply that out. So 200 minus 196 gives me positive 4. And bring my y's down. Y equals, y equals, y equals. And this is my vertex form. 4 times x minus 7 plus 4. Going back to the square pieces. Since my squares have to be added here inside the parentheses, I needed to subtract it here on the outside of the parentheses because I need to keep the balance of the equation. Okay, so if I add 64 or 4 here, then I have to subtract 4, so it balances out to 0. When I get to 5 and 6, I have to take into account that factor. So this factor was negative 3, and I had to take into account that whole quantity. Okay. Okay, objective 3 is writing quadratic equations using attributes, and we're going to be using the vertex today. First thing I would suggest is labeling your points. The vertex has H and K. while your point has x and y. We have another piece of information that it's opening upward, so our a should be positive. And our formula, or vertex form, is f of x is equal to a times x minus h squared plus k. And we're going to be substituting in these numbers into this formula to find a, so we can write the equation. So f of x is the same as y, that's 3. A is the variable I'm going to be trying to find. X is 1 minus h is 0 plus k is 0. So I'm going to substitute those numbers in, and then I'm going to simplify it. So parentheses come first. So it's going to be 3 equals a times negative 1 squared, and plus 0, I can drop that off because it's nothing. Then negative 1 squared is 1, so 3 is equal to a. Okay, so now that I have that, I can write my equation. F of x equals a, which is now 3, times x minus h, which is 2, squared, and then I have a 0 here. So if I write plus 0, anything plus 0 is 0 anyway, so I don't really need to write that piece. So my final equation becomes f of x is equal to 3 times x minus 2 squared. Okay. Number 8, same thing. Label your points, h and k, x and y. I'm going to substitute in. I have my formula over here, so I'm going to use that. So it's going to be negative 4 equals a times x is negative 5 minus h, which is negative 3, squared, and plus k again is 0. Now in my parentheses, I have that double negative, so I need to take care of that. And in my parentheses, I need to simplify, so it's going to give me negative 2 now, squared, and I can drop that 0 off. Negative 4 is going to equal negative 2 squared, which is positive 4a, divide by 4. And my a is equal to negative 1, which makes sense since it's going to be opening downward. Now I can write my equation. F of x is equal to negative 1, and I'm just going to write the negative. Then x minus negative 3, which becomes positive 3, a double negative. And then just like before, when I have that 0 there, I don't really need to write it. So this would become my equation. Okay, number 3, again, label your points, hk, x, y. And we're going to solve for a. So I have 0 equals a times x, negative 1 minus 0 squared plus 1. So I do have a k this time. Parentheses come first, so a equals negative 1 squared plus 1. Exponents, 0 is equal to 1a plus 1, and then I'm going to subtract 1 to solve for a, and a is equal to negative 1. So my equation is going to be f of x equals, I'm going to use the negative, I'm going to have x minus 0 squared plus 1. That was my k. But since I have a 0 here, it's just going to be x. So I'm just going to clean that up a little bit more, and it's going to be negative x squared plus 1. And that would be my cleaned up version of the equation. Okay, number 10, again, label your points, h and k, x and y. We're going to find a again. So f of x is 7 times a times x, which is 3, minus h, which is 2, squared, plus 5. Again, parentheses come first. A equals 1 squared plus 5. 1 squared is 1, so it's going to be 7 equals a plus 5. Subtract the 5, and I get 2 as my a. And then I write my equation. F of x is equal to a, which is 2, times x, minus 2, which is h, squared, plus 5, which is k. And this is my equation.